Hi, welcome back. Today we're going to look at maximizing utility, and that's in Chapter 10 of your book, pages 250 to 263. And our goals for today is to make sure that we understand and can explain the concept of diminishing marginal utility, and then use that information and marginal analysis to determine what our optimal consumption bundle is. What's the optimal amount of each good or service that I am interested in purchasing, and how much of each should I be purchasing in order to maximize my happiness. Before we get there, we need to talk a little bit about what we mean by utility. In economics, utility is a measure of somebody's happiness or enjoyment they get out of a product or service. And one of the units that is used is called utils. How many utils of happiness do you get? And so we can express that in terms of numbers. And what we know is that everything that we purchase, whether it's a good or service, has some degree of utility. It provides us with a certain degree of happiness. And so we need to kind of measure not only our total amount of happiness, but how much incremental happiness do I get with each additional item that I buy. And knowing that every good has utility, I can use that to determine how much of a particular good or service to purchase in order to maximize my total happiness. And we do that using what's known as marginal utility, because we know that the amount of utility I get for each additional item is going to be different than the amount of utility I had for the previous item. So for example, if we look at Slurpees, we could say if I go from 0 Slurpees per week, where I have 0 happiness or utility, to 1 Slurpee, I'm going to get 40 units of happiness. So the marginal utility, the increase in utility I receive for 1 more Slurpee, is 40 utils. So if I go from 1 Slurpee to 2, then I'm going to go from 40 units of happiness to 70. So the incremental increase going from 1 Slurpee to 2 is 30 utils. So my marginal utility there would be 30. Going from 2 to 3, my marginal utility would be 20 utils, because I had 70 units of total happiness with 2 Slurpees. Now with 3, I've got 90 units of total happiness. So I've added 20 utils. Marginal utility then would be 20. And so for 4 Slurpees, it's 10. For 5, it's 5. And for 6, we have negative 15 utils of marginal utility, meaning I actually lost 15 units of happiness by having the 6th Slurpee, which makes sense, because at some point I've had so many Slurpees I just don't want any more, and another Slurpee just makes me feel sick, and I'm actually worse off than I was before. So what we see is that marginal utility begins to gradually decline over time, which is known as diminishing marginal utility. So if we're looking to determine what's the maximum amount of consumption of Slurpees I should be looking into in order to maximize my happiness, the answer would be 5. Not only because that's my greatest total utility, but it's the last unit where I had a positive marginal utility. When I went from 4 Slurpees to 5, I increased happiness by 5 utils, but when I went from 5 Slurpees to 6, I actually lost 15 units of happiness. So we're going to continue to consume until our marginal utility ceases to be positive. This sort of calculation kind of assumes that I have unlimited resources, but the reality is that I don't have the resources to buy all of every good that I want, and so I need to deal with the fact that I have a budget constraint. I can't buy everything I want. I can only buy what I can afford. And so we create what's called a budget line, and that budget line looks at all of the possible combinations of 2 different goods and services that I could buy. And using that creates what's known as a consumption possibilities curve, which looks a lot like the production possibilities curve that you've seen in the past. So, for example, I can pretend that I have an income of $50, and I'm going to choose between 2 goods, either notebooks or CDs. And notebooks are $5 a piece, and CDs are 10. So at $50 income, I could buy 10 notebooks and no CDs, which would be up here. Or I could buy 5 CDs and no notebooks, which would be down here. Or any sort of combination between those 2 points. So for example, I could choose 6 notebooks and 2 CDs, and that would fully spend my $50. I could do point A with 2 notebooks and 1 CD, but then I've got extra money left over, and that doesn't seem particularly efficient. I could not do point C. That's a combination that's beyond my current income. If I make more money, I could do that. But as it stands, if I were to purchase 6 notebooks and 5 CDs, that would be far more than the $50 income that I have. So what I need to do is figure out what point along this budget line maximizes my total utility or total happiness. In order to do that, I'm going to use this idea of marginal analysis and marginal utility. More specifically, I'm going to look at the marginal utility per dollar spent. So I'm going to look at bang for my buck. If I spend $1, which good will give me more marginal utility? I don't care about total utility. I just want to know what's going to give me the most additional happiness for every dollar that I spend. And whichever good has the higher marginal utility per dollar is the good that I will buy. And I'll keep buying that good until its marginal utility per dollar spent is either equal to the other goods or less. So let me give you an example. Again, we'll look at notebooks and CDs. Pretend we have a $50 income. Their notebooks are $5 a piece, CDs are $10. So I'm trying to calculate my marginal utility per dollar spent. So if we look at notebooks, we say they come in packs of 2. Each notebook is worth $5 a piece. So the first 2 notebooks I buy bring me a total utility of 70 utils. Assuming that each notebook is exactly the same and has the same amount of utility, we'd say each notebook has 35 utils. And if we take that 35 utils and divide it by the $5 price, I find that each of the first 2 notebooks brings me 7 utils per dollar spent. And if I look at the next 2 notebooks, assuming they're both essentially equal, they have a marginal utility between the 2 of them of 60 utils, which is really 30 utils per notebook. So 30 utils divided by $5 spent tells me that it's 6 utils per dollar for the next 2 notebooks. If I go to 6 notebooks, the marginal utility then is 50. So it's 25 utils per notebook divided by $5 tells me I get 5 utils per dollar spent, and I could go on down from there. And if I look at CDs, it's the same thing. The first CD brings me 80 utils. That's a marginal utility of 80 divided by the price $10 gives me 8 utils per dollar spent. If I go to the second CD, I have a marginal utility of 70 divided by $10 tells me the second CD is 7 utils per dollar spent, and I can work my way down from there. So how do I decide? Well, I look and say which of these 2, notebooks or CDs, brings me the most marginal utility per dollar spent, and I can see that it's CDs. The first CD brings me 8 marginal utility per dollar versus notebooks which only give me 7. So I will buy a CD first. Then I say, okay, well, I've still got more money. I have $40 left, so what am I going to spend the $40 on? The second CD gives me $7 in marginal utility, 7 utils per dollar spent, and the notebooks give me 7 utils per dollar spent. Because they're equal, I say I'm indifferent between the 2, so I will be happy to purchase both a second CD and 2 notebooks. And then I go on down from there. I say, all right, well, the next set of notebooks gives me 6 utils per dollar spent, and CDs gives me 6 utils per dollar spent. I'm indifferent between the 2, so I'll go ahead and buy 3 CDs and 4 notebooks. At this point, I have spent my entire budget, and I find that my total utility will be maximized with 4 notebooks and 3 CDs, because the marginal utility per dollar spent of the notebook is going to be equal to that for the CD. And so this is my optimum bundle. You could create other bundles that would still use up my $50 budget, but that will bring less total utility as a result. So this is kind of the best option we can have. If I find myself in a situation where the marginal utility of a good is greater than the other, like I did with CDs, and I bought the first CD, it was 8 utils per dollar spent versus 7 for the notebooks. By purchasing that CD, I know that there is diminishing marginal utility. I'm going to have less happiness with the second CD than I had with the first. And so that ratio of marginal utility to price should begin to diminish. And so as long as I purchase more goods, this ratio diminishes and approaches equaling the ratio for the other good, and when they're equal, I buy one of each. And again, we keep going down until we run out of money. So that's kind of the goal for optimizing your consumption. We've got lots of problems to practice on in class. Make sure to fill out your response form, and we'll work on it when we see each other again, and I'll see you then.